My dad asked why my sister was driving the BMW he gave me for my 21st birthday. Before I could answer, my mom smiled and said, "He traded the car for a Harley Davidson." My dad's face went serious, and what he did next made my sister regret that day forever. My dad asked in a stern voice, "Why is Sophia with your car, son?" I was about to make up an excuse, but my mom, who loves stirring things up and was clearly on Sophia's side, cut me off and dropped the bomb. "He traded it, honey. He sold the BMW and bought that loud Harley Davidson he's always staring at in the showroom." My dad's face went pale. He hates motorcycles. To him, a Harley is the symbol of failure. He just looked at me without saying a word. Then he grabbed his phone, made a short call, and hung up. My sister, still smiling, had no idea about the storm she had just started. The silence in the room felt heavy. My dad didn't raise his voice, didn't ask for explanations, and that's what made it worse. He just walked past me, calm, collected, but I could tell from the way his jaw was locked that something inside him had snapped. My mom tried to act casual, pretending she hadn't just lit a fire. She started talking about dinner plans, but no one was listening. My dad went straight to the garage. I followed him because I knew that look. It was the same one he had when he found out I'd flunked my first semester of college. He stood in front of the empty space where my BMW used to be. It looked strange, that clean patch on the concrete where the car had always been parked. My dad didn't even turn around when he said, "So, you traded it, huh?" I didn't answer. I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that Mom was twisting things again. But the truth was worse. The BMW wasn't mine anymore. A week before, my sister Sophia had begged me to let her use it for a weekend trip. She said her car was in the shop, that she just wanted to drive something nicer for once. I agreed, thinking it was harmless, but when she came back, the car was gone, replaced by a used Harley parked in the driveway. She said her boyfriend, Lucas, had a deal too good to pass up. She thought I'd be thrilled. That was the day I realized Sophia had no idea what boundaries meant. Now, watching my dad's reflection in the metal cabinet, I could tell he already knew the truth. My mom had always covered for Sophia, and this time, she'd gone too far. Dad turned around slowly. "Where's the title?" he asked. I froze. I had signed it over, stupidly, blindly, because Sophia said she'd handle the insurance paperwork. I didn't even think about it. Before I could speak, my dad's phone rang. He answered, listened for a few seconds, and his expression darkened. He just said, "Bring it back, now." That's when I realized he'd called the dealership. He walked out without another word. My mom stayed quiet for once, and Sophia finally looked nervous. She followed him outside, asking questions, but he ignored her completely. That night, my dad didn't come home. The next morning, Sophia's BMW keys were sitting on the kitchen counter, except they weren't hers. They were mine. The dealership had taken back the Harley and returned the BMW, but there was something different. A folded document was taped to the steering wheel. It was the car title, now in my dad's name. Underneath, in his handwriting, it said, "You don't give away what you haven't earned." Sophia tried to laugh it off, but she couldn't hide how angry she was. For once, my dad didn't even look at her. He spent the morning cleaning the car, humming under his breath like nothing had happened. Later that day, my mom pulled me aside and said, "You should have protected your sister. You know how your father is." But I was done protecting her. Because I'd found something else in the glove box, a receipt from a pawn shop, dated 2 days before Sophia traded the car. It wasn't for jewelry or clothes. It was for my grandmother's engagement ring, the one my mom had promised to keep safe. That was when everything started to unravel. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pawn receipt. It had Sophia's signature on it. Rushed, messy, the same way she signed every school permission slip when we were kids. I kept wondering how far she'd gone this time. My dad didn't mention the ring the next morning, but I could tell he knew something was off. He didn't look at anyone during breakfast. He just read the paper, sipped his coffee, and left early. Mom tried to keep the mood light, saying he was just overreacting, but I could feel it. He wasn't going to let this go. When he got angry, he went quiet first. The silence always came before the storm. Sophia spent most of the day hiding in her room, pretending she had a headache. She avoided everyone. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. She'd been through this routine before. Break something, lie about it, cry until Mom took her side. Except this time, it wasn't just about money or a car. It was family. That ring had belonged to Grandma Evelyn, the only person Dad ever spoke about with warmth. Around noon, I went to the pawn shop listed on the receipt. The man behind the counter didn't even look surprised when I mentioned the ring. He pulled out the item slip and said, "You her brother? You might want to get here faster next time. She almost didn't make the deadline." He slid the ring across the counter. It was still beautiful, even in that cheap fluorescent light. A small diamond, slightly chipped, but perfectly clean. I paid what Sophia had pawned it for and left before the man could ask questions. When I got home, Dad's car was already in the driveway. He was waiting for me in the kitchen. The ring was in my pocket, but I didn't show it to him yet. He didn't yell. He just asked, "Did you know about the ring?" I said yes. He nodded once, slow and disappointed. "Your mother told me Sophia had borrowed it for a dinner." Of course she did. Mom always had a story ready. I took the ring out and placed it on the table. He looked at it for a long time before picking it up. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't say a word. Then he walked past me toward the hallway. A minute later, I heard Sophia's door slam. The argument didn't last long. It never did with him. He didn't shout or threaten. He just stated facts, and that was enough to crush her. When he came back, his face was calm again, but his eyes looked older. "She's leaving," he said simply. I didn't ask where. Mom came home later and immediately started yelling at him. I stayed in my room, listening to the muffled sounds of their argument. It was the same script as always. Mom defending Sophia, Dad saying enough was enough. But then his voice broke through, low and final. "She's 24. She's had every chance. I'm done." The house went quiet after that. An hour later, I heard the front door open. Sophia walked out with 2 suitcases, mascara smudged, pretending to be the victim again. She didn't look at me when she passed. Maybe she thought I'd stop her, but I didn't. I couldn't. For a moment, I felt guilty, but then I remembered the pawn slip, the empty spot where the BMW used to be, the look in Dad's eyes when he saw it gone. That night, I helped him put the ring back in the old jewelry box. He didn't say anything, but when he closed the lid, it felt like a chapter had ended. Mom didn't talk to either of us for days. She said we'd push Sophia away, that she'd never forgive us if something happened to her, but I didn't feel sorry anymore. For once, the chaos was gone, and the house finally felt quiet, not tense, just still. A week later, I came home from work and found an envelope taped to my door, no return address. Inside was a photo. My BMW parked outside a rundown apartment complex. Sophia was sitting on the hood, smiling, holding a beer in one hand and Lucas's arm in the other. On the back of the photo, there were only 2 words written in black marker. "Miss me?" I stared at it for a long time before tossing it into my drawer. I didn't show Dad. I didn't tell Mom. I just pretended it never arrived. But a few days later, the dealership called. They said someone had tried to file a report claiming the BMW was illegally repossessed. The caller had used my name. That's when I knew Sophia wasn't done. The call from the dealership threw me off completely. I was at work when it came through. The manager's number flashing on my screen like a warning. The woman on the other end sounded cautious, almost apologetic, but the words she said made my stomach twist. "Someone claiming to be you called about the BMW," she said. "They said your father took it without consent and they want to report it as theft." I froze. It wasn't hard to guess who it was. Only one person in the world would think of something that stupid and reckless. Sophia. I hung up and sat there staring at the floor, feeling that same mixture of anger and disbelief that had been building since the day she traded my car. Every time I thought she'd hit rock bottom, she managed to dig deeper. That evening, when I got home, Dad was in the garage again, wiping down the BMW like it was a ritual. I didn't tell him about the call. Not yet. He looked calmer lately, lighter even, and I didn't want to throw him back into that chaos. Mom, on the other hand, was distant. She barely looked at either of us. Sometimes I caught her checking her phone, clearly waiting for messages from Sophia. I could tell she was talking to her in secret. I didn't confront her, but I kept watching. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not addressed to me or Dad, but to the owner of the vehicle. It was from a local law firm. The letter claimed the BMW had been wrongfully retained, and that the original arrangement needed to be restored immediately. I didn't even finish reading it before I realized what had happened. Sophia had hired a lawyer. It didn't matter that the car was legally in Dad's name now. She was trying to scare him, to make him give in. That was her pattern. Break something, make a scene, then play the victim until someone caved. I took the letter inside and left it on the kitchen table. When Dad saw it, he didn't even flinch. He read it once, folded it carefully, and said, "I'll handle it." He didn't tell me how. 2 days later, Mom left town to visit her sister, but I knew better. She packed too quickly, avoided my eyes, and took her old jewelry box, the one she never brought on short trips. When I checked her phone later that night, I saw the message thread. Sophia had sent her a location pin and a message that said, "He'll change his mind when he sees what I have." I didn't know what that meant, but it felt like something bad was coming. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me tense. A car door outside, footsteps on the porch, the hum of the refrigerator. I kept thinking about Dad. How calm he'd been. How quiet. That silence wasn't peace. It was focus. The next morning, he was gone. His phone sat on the kitchen counter next to the folded letter from the lawyer. The BMW was gone too. Hours passed with no word. Mom wasn't answering her phone either. I tried calling the dealership, the lawyer's office, even Sophia's number, but nothing, just silence. Then, around 5 p.m., Dad came home, alone. He didn't say where he'd been, but there was a different kind of exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that doesn't come from work or anger, the kind that comes from final decisions. He sat down at the table and finally looked at me. "It's done," he said. "That's all. No details, no explanation." He handed me a folded paper and walked to his room. When I opened it, it was another title transfer. The BMW was in my name again. But this time, there was a note attached in his handwriting. "You'll learn who deserves what. Keep it that way." I wanted to ask him what had happened, what he'd done, but something told me not to. Later that night, Mom came home. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. She didn't speak to either of us. She just went straight to her room and locked the door. Through the thin walls, I could hear her crying. Not soft, quiet crying, the kind that sounds like something inside has finally broken. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. But the next morning, when I walked outside to head to work, there was a folded piece of paper under the windshield wiper of the BMW. It wasn't a letter. It was a photo. Sophia, standing in front of a chain-link fence, her expression blank, almost hollow. Written across the bottom in her handwriting were the words, "He won't talk to me again." I stood there in the driveway, staring at that photo until my hands started shaking. The morning sun was too bright, the air too still. I didn't even realize how long I'd been standing there until a neighbor waved, and I had to pretend everything was fine, but nothing was fine. The look on Sophia's face in that picture wouldn't leave my mind. It wasn't defiant or smug like usual. It looked empty, like she'd finally realized she'd gone too far. The message, "He won't talk to me again," felt like a confession and a threat at the same time. When I got inside, Dad was already at the table, drinking his coffee like nothing had happened. His calmness scared me more than if he'd yelled. He looked at me once, nodded toward the car keys, and said, "You'll need to keep that one locked up from now on." That was it. No mention of Sophia, no mention of Mom's breakdown the night before. I wanted to ask him what happened when he disappeared, but his face said it all. Whatever had gone down between him and Sophia, it was final. Mom didn't come out of her room for 2 days. She barely ate. I heard her whispering on the phone once, her voice trembling, then silence again. I started to think she regretted going to see Sophia, maybe even blamed herself for how things turned out. By the 3rd day, I couldn't take the tension anymore. I went through Mom's purse while she was asleep. Inside, I found another photo. Same background, same chain-link fence. But this time, Sophia wasn't alone. She was standing beside Lucas, the boyfriend. His arm was around her, but the look on his face wasn't comforting. It was defensive, nervous. Behind them, I could see something spray-painted on the wall in red letters. "Stay away." No date, no message, just that. When I showed the photo to Dad, he stared at it for a long time. Then he said quietly, "She called me that morning, told me she wanted to meet, said she was ready to fix things." He paused for a long time like he wasn't sure if he should keep going. Then he said, "When I got there, Lucas was waiting. She never showed up." I felt my stomach twist. "Where?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "An old auto yard off Riverside." That name hit me immediately. It was where Lucas worked part-time, a dusty stretch of land full of wrecked cars and scrap metal. I'd driven by it once or twice, and even from the road it looked abandoned. Dad leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall. "He told me she'd left town," he said. "Said she wanted to start over." I didn't believe that for a second. Neither did he. That night, I drove to Riverside. The lot was empty, the fence half collapsed, and a broken "for lease" sign hanging crooked by the gate. The place smelled like oil and rust. I parked outside and walked around the perimeter, trying to understand what Sophia had been doing there. That's when I saw it. faint tire tracks, fresh, leading around the back. I followed them until they disappeared near a row of crushed cars. One of them had a pink phone case wedged under the door. I picked it up. It was cracked, dead, but the sticker on the back said S, her phone. I didn't call the police right away. I don't know why. Maybe part of me still believed this was another one of her games. But when I got home and showed Dad the phone, he went completely still. He took it from me carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Don't tell your mother," he said. Then he walked outside with it, started the BMW, and drove away again. He didn't come back that night. When he finally returned the next morning, there was dirt on his jeans and grease on his hands. He went straight to the kitchen sink, washed up, and didn't say a word. The phone was gone. Mom came out of her room while he was still there. She looked exhausted, but there was something strange in her eyes, something like relief. "You found her, didn't you?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. She nodded slowly, as if she already knew the truth. Then she turned to me and said, "You'll understand one day why he did what he did." That sentence has been echoing in my head ever since. After my mom said that, "You'll understand one day why he did what he did," I couldn't stop thinking about it. She said it so calmly, almost like she'd accepted something I hadn't yet figured out. Dad barely spoke that entire week. He went to work, came home, ate dinner in silence, then sat out on the porch until late every night. No TV, no phone, no small talk, just silence. Sometimes I'd look out the window and see him staring down the street, his hand gripping a glass of water like it was holding him together. Mom pretended everything was fine. She cooked, cleaned, even laughed at random times like she was trying to convince herself that life was normal again. But every time she walked past Dad, she flinched. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw it. Something had changed between them, something they weren't saying. A few days later, a brown envelope arrived in the mail with no return address. My name was on it, written in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper, a receipt for a storage unit rental under Lucas Ramirez's name, paid in cash. The address was just 15 minutes away. There was also a note. "If you want the truth, don't bring your dad." I didn't tell anyone. That night, I drove to the address. The place was quiet, one of those 24-hour storage complexes with cameras everywhere and a half-asleep guard sitting in a booth. I gave him a fake name and said I was meeting someone to pick up a few boxes. He didn't even look up, just buzzed me through. Unit 114. That was the number on the receipt. When I opened it, I expected junk, tools, maybe car parts, but the space was almost empty except for a tarp-covered crate in the center and a stack of papers on top. My name was written across the first page. I unfolded it. It was a copy of the BMW's first sales document, the original, signed by Dad, dated 2 years ago. Below that, a printed email thread between Sophia and Lucas. They'd been trying to sell the car to pay off one of Lucas's debts. The Harley trade story was just a cover. They'd been planning it for weeks. The fake signatures, the staged trade, even the story about my sister borrowing the car. As I read further, I found something worse, a note from Lucas to Sophia. "If your dad finds out, he'll destroy me. You better handle it before he does." I dropped the paper. My hands were sweating. Under the tarp, there was another box, smaller, taped shut. I opened it and found 2 things inside: a broken phone with the same pink case I'd seen near the auto yard, and a folded photo of my dad standing next to his truck. The photo looked like it had been taken secretly, from a distance. Someone had been watching him. I grabbed everything and left fast. My chest hurt by the time I reached my car. I locked the doors and just sat there, breathing hard. When I got home, Dad was still on the porch. He didn't look surprised when I walked up with the box. He just sighed, like he already knew what I'd found. "Where did you get that?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You were supposed to stay out of it." "Out of what?" He looked at me, tired, almost sad. "Out of their mess. It's not yours to fix." I wanted to yell at him, demand to know what really happened between him, Sophia, and Lucas, but he stood up and said quietly, "Some debts don't get paid with money." Then he went inside. That night, Mom came into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed, holding a cup of tea she never drank. Her eyes were red. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said softly. "Your father tried to protect you from all of it." "Protect me from what?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "From the truth about your sister." Before I could say anything, she stood up and left. The next morning, the police were at our door. They wanted to ask my father a few questions about a missing person report filed for Lucas Ramirez. The two detectives showed up just after sunrise. Their car was still idling in the driveway when they knocked on the door. I was in the kitchen, halfway through pouring coffee, when I saw my dad walk past me to open it. He didn't look surprised, just tired, like he'd been expecting it. They asked for him by name, showed their badges, and stepped inside. Mom froze at the sink, clutching a dish towel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I tried to listen from the hallway, but their voices were too low. I only caught fragments. Storage unit, last known contact, vehicle transaction. After 15 minutes, they asked my dad to come down to the station for a few questions. He didn't argue. He just grabbed his jacket and keys. When he passed me, he said, "Stay here. Don't talk to anyone until I get back." Then he was gone. The silence afterward was suffocating. Mom sat at the table staring at the floor, her lips trembling. When I asked what they wanted, she said, "They think your father had something to do with that boy disappearing. That boy." She couldn't even say Lucas's name. I told her about the documents I found in the storage unit, about how Sophia and Lucas had planned to sell the BMW behind our backs, but she just shook her head. "It doesn't matter what they planned. Something happened after. Something your father hasn't told us." She said it like she knew. By afternoon, my dad still hadn't come back. I tried calling, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The detectives hadn't left any card, no contact number, just silence again. That evening, I went through the garage looking for clues, even though I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Everything was neat. His tools lined up, the car spotless, nothing out of place. But when I opened the small drawer of his workbench, I found something strange. A black USB drive, no label. I plugged it into my laptop upstairs, half expecting nothing. There were two files. One was a folder named Riverside. Inside were photos of the scrapyard, Lucas's truck, and my dad's own car parked near the fence. Each photo had a timestamp from the same day he'd said he met Lucas. The second file was a video. It was shaky, recorded on a phone. The camera was facing a chain-link fence at dusk. I could see Sophia standing near the entrance, arguing with someone off-screen. Then Lucas appeared. The audio was faint, but I could make out bits and pieces. Sophia was saying, "You said you'd pay him back." Lucas shouted something like, "He's not getting a damn cent more." Then another voice, my father's, cut through, calm, quiet, almost too controlled. "You made a deal with my daughter using what wasn't yours to take. You think you walk away from that?" The camera shifted, like whoever was recording got nervous. I saw Lucas step back. Sophia was crying. Then the video ended abruptly. I sat there, frozen. My father had been there. He'd seen them together. I didn't know what happened after that. The footage cut off too soon. But the timestamps, the tone, the silence after that night, everything started to make sense in a way I didn't want it to. When I went back downstairs, Mom was standing by the window watching the street. She didn't turn when she said, "He'll come home, but it won't fix anything." "Did you know about that video?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "He showed it to me the night he came back, said it was proof he didn't touch that boy. But I saw his hands shaking. He's never shaken like that." That night, I didn't sleep. Every car that passed outside made me tense. I kept thinking about Sophia, about the message, "He won't talk to me again." What if that wasn't about Dad? What if it was about Lucas? The next morning, my dad came home. His clothes were wrinkled, and he looked like he hadn't slept either. He didn't say a word when he walked in. Mom tried to hug him, but he just brushed past her and sat at the table. "They don't have anything," he said finally. "No body, no car, no witness." Then he looked straight at me. "You didn't open the drawer in the garage, did you?" I froze. I don't know how he knew. Maybe he just saw it in my face. He sighed, leaned back, and said quietly, "Whatever you think you saw, you didn't." He got up and went to his room, closing the door behind him. Later that day, I checked the garage again. The drawer was empty. The USB was gone. But when I started the BMW that night, a folded piece of paper slid out from under the sun visor. In my dad's handwriting, it said, "She's not missing. Stop looking." After finding that note in the BMW, "She's not missing. Stop looking." I couldn't stop replaying those words. It wasn't the message itself that scared me. It was the handwriting, my dad's. Steady, deliberate, like he'd written it to make sure I didn't misunderstand. I sat there in the car for a long time, staring at it under the dashboard light. Outside, everything looked calm, but inside that house, calm was just the mask we all wore to survive each other. When I walked back in, Mom was at the kitchen table, still awake even though it was past midnight. She had her phone next to her, the screen dark. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked without looking up. I didn't answer. She sighed. "He thinks he's protecting you. But he doesn't understand what it's like to live with something you don't know. The not knowing eats you alive." That's when I realized she didn't want the truth either. Not the real one. She just wanted to believe there was still something left to hold on to. A story that made sense, even if it was built on lies. For the next few days, the house felt quieter than ever. Dad barely spoke. Mom tried to pretend things were normal, and I pretended to believe her. But underneath it all, there was a kind of waiting, like we were all sitting through the last few seconds before something breaks. I started going through old boxes in the attic, looking for anything that might explain the kind of man my dad really was before everything fell apart. I found his military records, his old job files, letters from Grandma Evelyn, the woman whose ring Sophia had pawned. One of them stood out. It was dated years ago, written in the shaky handwriting of someone close to the end of her life. "You always said you could fix everything, James, but some things break in ways you can't repair. Learn to let them go." Reading that, I realized something. My dad didn't believe in letting anything go. Not grudges, not mistakes, not people. And maybe that's why Sophia broke the way she did. That afternoon, I went for a drive. Not far. Just out to the lake where we used to go as kids. The place where Dad taught us how to drive. Where Sophia used to laugh so loud, people stared. I parked the BMW near the edge of the pier and sat there, trying to remember the last real conversation I'd had with her before everything turned ugly. All I could remember was how she looked at me when she first brought up the car trade, that spark in her eyes that said she knew she was doing something wrong but couldn't stop herself. She wasn't malicious. She was reckless, desperate for attention in a house that only noticed her when she messed up. And maybe Dad's silence was the worst punishment he could have given her. When I got home, Mom was in the living room, holding one of Sophia's old photo albums. She was crying quietly, flipping through the pages, whispering things I couldn't hear. I sat down across from her and she said, "You were always the responsible one. She hated that about you." I didn't know what to say. "She used to tell me," Mom continued, "that you got the best parts of him, the patience, the control. She said she only got the parts that hurt." For a moment, she looked at me like she was seeing someone else. Then she said, "Your father keeps things because he can't face them. That's why the garage is always clean. That's why the drawers are locked." After she went to bed, I sat alone, thinking about what she'd said. The next morning, while Dad was out, I went back to the garage again. I checked the drawers, empty, the cabinets, spotless, but then I noticed the floor mats under his workbench weren't lined up evenly. When I lifted one, there was a metal hatch, something I'd never seen before. It wasn't locked. Inside was a small box. Not a secret stash of money or keys, just a stack of papers and an old photograph. The picture showed all four of us: Dad, Mom, me, and Sophia. We were standing in front of the BMW on the day he gave it to me for my birthday. On the back, in Dad's handwriting, was one sentence: "Families don't heal when they hide." There was also a folded sheet of paper underneath, a letter addressed to me. I didn't open it, not yet. I just sat there, holding it, feeling that same ache that had been sitting in my chest for weeks, because I already knew what it said. It wasn't going to be an explanation or an apology. It was going to be a confession. Not about Sophia or Lucas, but about him. About the kind of man he'd become trying to keep everything from falling apart. And maybe that was the truth Mom had been talking about all along. Not the mystery of where Sophia went, but the realization that every secret in this family started with him. I kept the letter in my pocket for 2 whole days before opening it. I carried it everywhere. To work, in the car, even to bed. But I couldn't bring myself to unfold it. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. But the truth was, I was scared of what it might take away from me. The house had been too quiet lately. Dad went through his routines like clockwork. Up at 6, work in the garage, dinner at 7, then sitting outside until long after midnight. Mom hovered around him, not talking much, just existing in his orbit. Every time their eyes met, I saw something between them. Not anger, not affection, just shared exhaustion. On the 3rd night, I finally took the letter out to the porch. The air was cool and the neighborhood was asleep. I sat in the same chair where I'd watched Dad sit for weeks and unfolded the paper. His handwriting was neat, careful, the way he always wrote when something mattered. "I know you'll find this eventually." I didn't write it to explain everything. Some things don't belong in words. But I need you to understand the kind of silence I've lived with. I stopped reading for a second, then kept going. When I was your age, I thought family meant keeping everyone safe. I believed that if I worked hard enough, paid every bill, fixed every mistake, we'd be okay. But what I really did was teach this house how to hide. Your mother hides behind forgiveness. Your sister hid behind charm. You hide behind reason. And me, I hide behind control. When Sophia traded that car, it wasn't about money. It was about wanting to be seen. She knew how much that car meant to me, not because of the value, but because it was supposed to mark the day I trusted you to build your own life. She took that and turned it into a test, one I failed before I even opened my mouth. I didn't go after her to punish her. I went to ask her why she keeps burning bridges she can't rebuild. But when I saw the way she looked at me, scared, small, I realized I was the bridge. I was the thing she needed to burn to feel free. So I let her go. That line hit me hard. My hands were shaking. She left, son, on her own terms. I don't know where. I don't need to. But if she ever comes back, don't give her the same silence I gave her. You break it. You listen. I didn't lose her because she lied. I lost her because I stopped trying to understand. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can't protect a family by pretending everything's fine. You protect it by being honest even when it hurts. The letter ended there. No signature, just his initials, J.A., and a small oil stain at the corner, like he'd set it down on his workbench before deciding whether or not to leave it at all. I sat there for a long time, reading it over and over. Every word felt heavy. Not like a confession, but like a man admitting he'd spent half his life building walls around the people he loved. When I finally went inside, Dad was asleep on the couch. The TV was still on, playing some old Western he probably didn't even remember turning on. I stood there for a moment, watching him breathe, realizing how human he suddenly looked. Mom came out of their room, saw the letter in my hand, and didn't ask what it said. She just nodded like she'd been waiting for this moment. He never stopped looking for her, she whispered. Just stopped expecting her to answer. The next morning, I went back to the lake. I brought the letter with me and sat on the pier. The BMW parked behind me. That same car that had somehow become the center of everything. I read the letter one more time, then folded it and tucked it under the passenger seat. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like truth. Messy, incomplete, and painful. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry anymore, just sad. Sad for the version of us that used to laugh together. Sad for the parts of my sister that were probably still out there, trying to find peace in her own way. When I drove home, the sky was starting to turn orange, and for once, the house didn't feel heavy when I walked in. Dad was fixing a leaky pipe in the kitchen, and Mom was humming quietly while drying the dishes. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, and maybe that was enough. For the first time in months, the house started to sound like a home again. Not in the loud, happy way it used to be, but in small, quiet ways. The sound of the coffee maker early in the morning, the smell of dinner that didn't taste like obligation, the way my dad actually hummed while fixing things around the house. It wasn't peace, exactly. More like a truce with the past. Mom seemed lighter, too. She stopped tiptoeing around him, stopped waiting for the next argument. She even started going back to her book club, something she hadn't done in years. When she left the house that first evening with her hair done and her favorite earrings on, she kissed Dad's cheek. He didn't say anything, but he smiled. I kept thinking about the line in his letter. You can't protect a family by pretending everything's fine. It played in my head every time I caught myself avoiding hard conversations. So one night, I asked him about it. We were sitting on the porch again, both staring into the dark yard. I told him I'd read the letter. He didn't seem angry or embarrassed. He just said, I figured you would. Then, after a long pause, he added, it took me too long to realize that silence is just another kind of lie. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. A few weeks passed. Life found a rhythm again. Work, home, quiet dinners, the occasional awkward laugh between me and Mom when Dad tried to fix something he clearly didn't know how to. I stopped waiting for the next piece of bad news, until it came. One Saturday morning, I went out to the driveway to wash the BMW. It had been sitting under the carport for weeks, gathering dust. When I opened the glove compartment to grab some paperwork, an envelope fell out. My name was on it, in handwriting that wasn't my dad's. Inside was a postcard, a beach scene from somewhere in Florida. The back had just a few words. Still figuring it out, don't worry. S. No address, no return name, just that. I stood there staring at it for a long time. The ink was smudged like it had been handled too many times. It didn't feel recent, but it didn't feel old either, like it had been written months ago. maybe even before everything fell apart. When I showed it to Mom, she pressed her hand to her mouth. "She's alive," she whispered, like saying it out loud made it real again. Then she started crying. Not the broken kind from before, but something softer. Dad looked at the card once, then handed it back. "Good," he said simply. Let her keep going. I could tell he meant it. That night, I left the postcard on my nightstand. I didn't text anyone about it, didn't post, didn't even tell friends. It felt too personal, too fragile, like saying too much would make it disappear. In the weeks that followed, I started to understand what my dad had meant in his letter. Some things aren't meant to be solved. Some people don't come back to be found. They come back to remind you to stop searching. The BMW stayed parked most days. I didn't drive it often, but when I did, I caught myself glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting her to be there, legs up on the dashboard laughing about something stupid. Sometimes when the garage was quiet, I'd hear my parents talking softly in the kitchen. They never mentioned Sophia's name, but I could tell that, in their own ways, they were trying to forgive her and themselves. And me? I learned that forgiveness isn't about saying, "It's fine." It's about finally admitting that it wasn't, and learning how to live with that truth anyway. Every now and then, I check the mailbox hoping for another postcard. Nothing ever comes. But that's okay. The silence doesn't hurt anymore. It just means she's out there, somewhere, living her own kind of peace. And for the first time since that birthday, since the BMW, since the lies and the shouting and the guilt, I think we all finally stopped hiding.